Hello, my name is Billy Galanko. I'm a certified sommelier, a WCET Diploma holder, and a Master of Wine student. But I wasn't always into wine. In fact, I got into wine in a really abrupt way. I basically went from knowing essentially nothing about wine to being a certified sommelier in 5 months. And when I say essentially knowing nothing about wine, I had two wines at that time that I could probably tell you by name. I rarely ever drink wine. And when I did drink wine, it was only red wine and occasionally a sparkling wine. In college, I had some Moscato d'Asti. It wasn't really Moscato d'Asti. It was barefoot bubbly, barefoot Moscato. And at parties in college, I had a little bit too much of that. So that kind of turned me off from some of those sparkling wines. But over the years, I had two red wines that I could remember and would have maybe every few months if I ever had any red wine. It was a 2008 Columbia Crest, two vines. It was a Shiraz from Washington State. I found that in college and tried to continue to drink it afterward. And the other wine I found in grad school was Maschiarelli Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, which is actually a really quality wine, but they just happened to serve it at a little pub next to my grad school. So I would have that occasionally on days where I didn't feel like drinking beer or something else. So it's the late 2016, December. I'd watched the movie Somm multiple times, and I was trying to figure out really what was so intriguing to me about this. They had aspects of geography and then senses. They were able to smell and taste things that I couldn't really comprehend. And not only that, they were drinking wines that I had never really heard of or knew existed. To me, they were just red and white, and I would have one once in a while. So I looked into how do people even start becoming a master sommelier? Like, obviously, they don't start out at that level. And looking into it further, I realized that there is this court of master sommeliers and there is 4 levels to take. And the intro level, anybody could sign up for. You didn't have to work in a restaurant. You didn't have to work in wine at all. So I was like, I kind of want to learn a bit more about wine. I want to get a certification. So, why not? I'll sign up. So this is December 2016. I signed up to learn about wine. At this point, really didn't know what I was going to do or how to learn about wine. I basically just started listening to podcasts. And that is one of the reasons why I started my own wine podcast, the Vint podcast, because at that time there were so few wine podcasts that I actually found interesting or helpful or good intros to wine in general. At that time, Guild Somm was a great podcast, and I started listening to that. I actually went to Christmas that year with my parents, and there was a bottle of Fleury from Baidu Trade. And that was great because I had listened to a podcast about Beaujolais, and it was the first wine I could ever recognize from my studies. So I bought that for my parents. Everybody loved it. And I still have the cork for that bottle to this day. But come the new year, so after December, I decided I really should start studying. The exam was in March. So I bought the Wine Bible, and I have my copy of the Wine Bible here. This is the latest edition. We also have Karen McNeil coming on the podcast. So like and subscribe so you don't miss that episode of the Vint podcast. And I started reading the Wine Bible. I basically read it front to back and learned everything I could about wine. At that time, it was completely foundational. I was learning about grapes, varieties that I had never heard of. Luckily, I was in New York City, so I had access to a ton of wine via wine shops because, some of the best European selections or global selections of wine are in shops in New York. I continued to study for an extended period of time. I took my studying as an excuse to take a long weekend. It was actually a President's Day, I believe, to go to Spain. It was just like a 4-day weekend to Spain. And I used the excuse to go tasting for a little while. Here's a picture of the first Albarino I ever had when I was in Madrid there. And then I actually convinced my friends to drive up to Rioja, the general region. We stayed in Logroño, and we did kind of a little bar crawl of wine tasting there. And to this day, I still really love Rioja, and it was a great experience. But at that time, I was like, this wine thing is fun. I'm learning a little bit. It's going to enhance my travels. Fast forward a little bit more. Down we're in March 2017. I went to the intro exam. And for those who don't know, the Court of Master Sommelier's intro exam is kind of a 2-day course. You get this book. I still have my book from the intro exam right here. And it's basically, you run through every wine region. And it's kind of like a little intro to each region, gives you a little bit of background, the styles of wine made. In theory, you're supposed to know all of this before coming into the exam. But if you didn't, master somms, literally people I saw on TV, we had Dustin Wilson, which was amazing. We had Pascaline Lepelletier, which I'm now a huge fan of. And we also had Laura Di Pasquale, who we just had on the podcast. And I hadn't really registered that she was one of my professors as well. They literally walk you by region and you taste wine along the way. So they'll give you 4 wines and you'll talk about those regions and really It's a really brilliant intro, actually. And at the end of the second day, you take an exam. And for me, I had in my vision, all of the movie Somm and all the stuff that goes on, this blind tasting, this really intense exam situation. And it was just a multiple choice test. And you just had to get, a certain percentage right. And at the end, they say, great, you got X amount right. And you got a little pin and that was it. And I thought that was great. And I was really excited to pass, but I was like, there's more to this. I caught the wine bug. I really wanted to go further with my studies. So I was like, what can I do next? How can I take the next level, the certified exam? This had blind tasting and service with it as well. Right. So I looked around and I could either sign up and take the exam right away or take a class that would help me prepare to take the certified exam. Now, this class was $10,000. And basically at the end of that, you are supposed to be prepared to take the certified. And I was like, I don't know, do I take a $10,000 class to really just tell me what's going to be on the exam and help me prepare? Or I could just take the exam right away, take it really soon, see what the experience is like, see what learnings I need. And then once I fail that, I'll be prepared to take the next exam. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any future uploads. And taking the exam was less than $1,000 at the time. So to me, it was a no-brainer. I immediately signed up to take the exam 6 weeks later. It was going to be early May. And from then I just started ramping up my studies intensely. Luckily, I had a buddy who owned a wine shop on the Upper West Side in New York and was also a certified som. So I would go up there. He would kind of advise me on his study process, the wines to know, the types of questions they would ask. And I was able to buy wines from him as well. And I also had to study a lot of different things. When you think of the sommelier exam, you don't necessarily think of cocktails. You don't think of coffee. You don't think of tea. But it turns out, being a sommelier on the floor anywhere, you need to know about every liquid beverage that could possibly be served at the table. So to prepare for the service part of the exam, I bought a cocktail book. I bought a wine pairing book about food because they can ask you questions. Master sommeliers can ask you questions about, what would pair well with this dish. And then from there, I basically started trying to learn everything about serving in a restaurant as well as blind tasting. So I was tasting nonstop, but also trying to develop service chops while working in advertising in New York. I had served for a little while after college. I worked for 6 months in a restaurant, so I knew how to hold a tray. But what I did not know is how to open sparkling wine tableside. So I bought a tray, would walk around my little New York apartment, pretending to serve invisible people with glasses. I would keep bottles of cava at that time because it had the highest pressure, and I would keep it at room temp or even warmer to really maximize how much pressure would be in that bottle. So I could tell, as I'm unscrewing the cage and holding on the cork, that I wouldn't be able to let it just fly out. Because part of what you're judged on by master sommeliers is how soft you're able to remove the cork and how little the fizz that comes out, or not fizz, but sound that comes out. So I practiced in my apartment. I was tasting. The only thing I've ever had to make flashcards for any of my wine studies. Everybody always talks about making flashcards for wine studies, and they even do it in the movie Somm, was for cocktails. For some reason, my mind does not work well with cocktails. I'll get to that when I talk about my actual exam here, but it did not work well. So I had cocktails, flashcards, trying to learn those. I was also learning about wine grapes. I have this book now, Wine Grapes. It is a huge book. At the time, it was well over $100, maybe closer to $200. And I was still early in my wine studies. So I was like, I'm not going to buy this book. So when am I going to use it again? So I would go to the big library in New York, the one that everybody's seen the day after tomorrow, and I'd have to go down and check it out. And you weren't even able to walk away with the book. You couldn't check it out really. So I would have some librarian bring it to me and I'd be looking at it at this table for hours, just reading about wine grapes. At the time, I thought it was the coolest thing, so fancy. I couldn't even leave with the book. So after these 6 weeks, I had some whirlwind studies. I tasted as much as I could. Luckily, New York had a ton of half bottles in shops. I'm still looking in LA now for places with as many half bottles as shops had in New York. That really helped me taste. And I also led wine classes. My buddy who owned the wine shop had wine classes, and there were some that were introductory enough. Also a birthday party that I ran where I would present wines, explain them, explain the structure, and really kind of start talking like I would to a master som, which was really helpful. Come early May, I am going down to Virginia Beach to take this exam. Now, for those who are not familiar, Virginia Beach is a kind of small town on the coast in Virginia. And why I was taking my sommelier exam there, well, as soon as I finished my intro exam, I looked to see where could I take the next level exam. And every major hub for many months was packed. New York was full. Boston was full. Turns out Virginia Beach was the only option. interestingly enough, I'm actually from Virginia Beach. So it was great. I was like, I'll use this excuse to go home and take the exam there. So I went home to take that exam. And funnily enough, my mom had actually tried to understand what I was doing because my parents, they don't know anything about wine, just like me a month before, had no idea what was going on. So there was a book called Cork Dork by Bianca Bosker, who we've also had on the podcast. Check out that episode with her. And she had done basically the same thing. She went from being a journalist to throwing herself into the world of wine. And in a year, I believe it was, became a certified sommelier. So she had trained with sommeliers, really kind of tried to master her palate. And that was just really interesting to my mom. And she's like, I did this so I can understand how you did. But what was fascinating to me is that Bianca was living in New York. So she was studying, had all access to the same wines, actually more wines because she was working with sommeliers. And then she took her intro in New York, but then she took her certified in Virginia Beach as well, which I thought was really funny. And in that book, she really describes Virginia Beach in an interesting way. Definitely makes it seem like a little bit more of a backwoods place, which is not. It's a great place. Everybody should go visit. So I was in Virginia Beach. The next day, I'd gone home. I was all prepped. I wore my suit, got my little pin on, and then I went to go take the exam. For those who don't know, there's a tasting component, a theory component, and a service component. So basically, we were prepared. We sat down, we did the tasting, we did the theory, and then before we go back for the service, we actually had a break. So during this break, I got lunch with a couple of folks who were taking the exam, and it's so interesting to me to hear all the stories of the people who are taking this exam and the different reasons behind them. A lot of these people worked in service industry for a really long time, which is what most people are doing, taking this exam. And they were really excited because they were going to get promotions or their company was paying for them to take this so that they could kind of take over the wine program. And everybody was really excited and looking forward to passing what they could do with that. For me, I felt kind of weird because I was like, I'm kind of taking this because I didn't want to pay for a $10,000 course. I just want to see what the exam's like and I'm taking it for fun. So that was interesting. They were surprised, but they were like, I'm sure you'll do fine. They were very nice. So we did the tasting part first and the theory next, or could have been in a different order. Can't really remember. It was kind of a blur. And also the wines were kind of a blur to me now. I think one was a Torontes just because I remember my buddy telling me I needed to taste one before going. And he always talked about it having a Muscat or Moscato nose and a Chardonnay palate. And that's how he was in working in wine and at his shop, got people into drinking, specific drinkers who like kind of that Moscato vibe, into drinking more serious wines. He would give them a Torontes and it would kind of ease them into maybe higher end Chardonnay or something like that. But when it came to the service component, this part consists of one, you take a tray with a bottle of sparkling and 6 glasses and you go and open it and serve a master sommelier. Now at the table, it's just a master sommelier and 5 empty chairs. You're basically pretending that there are other people with him. He'll tell you beforehand, like, this is my aunt over there. This is my uncle. This is my brother and my sister. This is the person of honor. So basically you had to make sure you address the person first, the person of honor, I guess you would call it. And then you would pour around the table, females first and then men in a clockwise manner. And you had to basically have the label facing the right way. And at certain times, the way the chairs were angled, I would actually have to apologize to invisible people. So I would try to pour. And if I didn't have a right angle, I'd have to say, sorry, ma'am, I'm going to pour this with my left hand. Hope you don't mind. And I would pour for them that way. But keep in mind, all these people were invisible. I start walking out to do my service component and I immediately hear a giant crash. So everybody's serving different master somms. Somebody who I had actually just gone to lunch with had started going out to try to do his service. He had either tripped or something happened and all of his glasses fell. His bottle of champagne went everywhere. And in my head, I kind of felt bad for him, but I was at least I'm not doing as bad as that guy. So I got through the champagne all right and was able to answer a bunch of his questions. And the 2 main things that stick out to me about his questioning and what they wanted, because the whole point after this is you're basically pretending you're doing like a fast forward meal. I said that number one, he was like, asking me for food pairings, asking me for different this and that. And then they would ask you, producers of certain calibers of wine. So you would be like, I'm interested in this type of wine. And I recommended a Rioja, partially because I had been there and I knew it well. And he was like, name me a few producers from Rioja that you enjoy. And I was able to rattle off 3 or 4 or 5 producers just because I had been there and I just tried a bunch. And it was actually perfect. That had been coming up on the exam. Now, the only downfall in the service actually for me was when we got to the cocktails. He asked me how to make a couple cocktails and, they worked really well for me. But then he got to a rusty nail. And I actually have to look it up as we speak right now because I still don't know what's in a rusty nail. I know it's whiskey and there's only one other ingredient. It's Drambuie in a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 ratio. So basically, I've done all these flashcards and he asked me one of the simplest cocktails. And I had to tell him that it was whiskey and I would have to go back and ask the bartender for more information because that's technically what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to fake it or guess because that's not what you would do at a restaurant. So I did that. And luckily, my honesty paid off at the end of this whole process. Out of, I think there were about 16 of us taking the exam, only two of us passed. One was the girl who was clearly very polished and she had been sailing through everything and was the most confident person I had seen. And then the other one was me. And it was amazing. And I still can't believe to this day that I passed. I brought home my little certificate, my pin, had a bottle of amazing ice wine from Mosul, which here's a photo of that. And yeah, then I was left to ponder how I would want to continue my wine journey, or would I want to stay working in advertising like I was at the time, or would I want to start working in wine? And I ultimately, as you can tell, made the decision to work in wine, but we'll have another episode on that because I ended up leaving my job in New York City, my advertising job, just quitting and going to work and make wine in Australia. So we'll have another video on that coming up soon. But that is how I became a certified sommelier in 5 months after knowing basically nothing about wine. And that is our episode. If you enjoyed that, like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more stories. Stay tuned for our interview with Karen McNeil, the author of the Wine Bible. And stay tuned for my story about how I quit my job in New York and moved to Australia to make wine. Cheers.